Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Licorice Pizza from 2021. Before we get to talking about the film, let's talk about the director for a second, who I should specify is Paul Thomas Anderson, who is not Wes Anderson, who is not Paul W.S. Anderson. Obviously, Wes Anderson is the director of films such as French Dispatch, and Paul W.S. Anderson, who, if you didn't know any better, you might think deliberately picked his name to be confused with the other two, is the director of a whole bunch of crappy action films, including the Resident Evil films, and also kind of a terrible person. But I won't get into all the specifics on that. Suffice to say, one of these things is not like the others. So, Paul Thomas Anderson. It turns out, have not watched almost anything in his filmography. I've only watched one other of his films, Punch Drunk Love, which was many years ago now, but I recall thinking was pretty darn good. I am surprised that I haven't watched any of his other films, especially since it turns out that literally all of them, how many are there? I think there's like 8 other ones that are actively on my to-watch list. Now that list is very long, but that doesn't discount the fact that literally all of his films are on it. And that is in part because he is often cited as a favorite director among people who are cinematically inclined, let's say. People who want a little bit more out of their movies, people who enjoy directorship and style and good writing and things like that. I don't know enough about him or his work in terms of direct experience to give a really good comment on that, but like I said, Punch Drunk Love was pretty good, and pretty much all of his films have gotten some levels of acclaim, even if they are a little bit more on the niche end of things. Licorice Pizza is a really interesting one, actually as a comparison to Punch Drunk Love, because of some narrative through lines I see that are similar. And relative to some of his other films, which are a little bit, well, part of the reason I probably haven't watched a few of them is that a few of them require an emotional and investment, and that I can't always muster. I don't know if that's how commonplace that is, but there's a lot of films that I just like, I can't watch that today. And sometimes that goes on for years. But anyway, I digress. A lot of his other films are a little less immediately palatable. But that's not to say that there's any less depth in either this or Punch Drunk Love. Licorice Pizza is an interesting story. I think we can start there. It's structurally, it's more of you could call it a romantic comedy, but I think that would be a disservice to it in a whole lot of ways. Not in terms of like slandering it with a genre that is often looked down upon, but in the sense that it's a much more complex storytelling arc and set of characters than that sort of titling would belie. The two main characters are very interesting in their own right, and actually, as far as their on-screen time goes, I don't have the metrics, but I think the vast majority of their on-screen time is spent not on-screen together, which I think is often a good thing in terms of developing a complex emotional relationship between characters. And boy, does this film do a great job at that. As far as developing complex complex relationships and a depth of character both in acting and other storytelling elements. This Licorice Pizza does an incredible job. My recollection is that Punch Drunk Love also has some really standout elements in that vein of storytelling, like exemplifying the show don't tell elements of a character's development, understanding where somebody comes from and how they became the person who is on the screen. And that takes a lot of levels of competence, from the writers, from the directors, from the actors. And I think Licorice Pizza excels in all of those. The two main characters might arguably not be the most compelling of all of the characters on screen, but the characters that revolve around the main characters are often a little bit more larger than life. It sort of runs the gamut in terms of how extreme that is. There's some that are to the point of comedy. There's some that are genuine historical characters. This film takes place in the 70s. I'll get back to that in a minute. And there are others that are just like played up and over the top, but they're not to the point of absurdity or like distracting from the narrative that tries to be told. It's fascinating to see over the top characters be manage to be on screen and not be the emotional focus because they are more of a narrative catalyst towards what's happening with other characters. Likewise, as far as understanding characters' development, there's a huge amount of complexity in just making a believable character without expositing a backstory or making them run their mouth or relying on tropes and, culturally mimetic elements to tell you who this character is, culturally and socially and all these other things. And I think for both the main characters, there's an exemplary job done in terms of writing them to be believable as who they are by their sort of core, how old they are, what their jobs and what their roles are in the world, and what their backgrounds are. But it goes, obviously, the writing has to be good there. The acting then has to be good to make those written characters translate into a believable character on screen. And then even beyond that, I think what's really incredible is some of the work done by, in particular, the families, but other sort of secondary characters in the lives of the two main characters who, without a lot of clear, without expositing, without any forced scenes or anything like that, watching the characters interact with the people around them in really well written but not overblown scenarios really goes to explore the characters themselves and say these are the people that this character interacts with on a daily basis, and who these people are matters vastly to who the main characters developed into, and how they see the world and what their beliefs are and what they think they need to be doing with their lives and all these sorts of things. And so you have these two main characters who both do a pretty excellent job on that front. The casting is all pretty brilliant across the board. There's some bigger name actors that are a little bit, they stand out a little bit more. I think it would be impossible for them not to. But as far as but they mostly play those sort of larger than life characters, and it's not jarring just because they are the human real life humans that they are, the real life actors. So that's not like a huge detraction. But the casting of a whole bunch of more minor characters is really great as well. For a movie that has a whole bunch of child actors in it, at no point was I bothered by any of them, except in the contexts where cinematically it's supposed to. But also the two main characters. My understanding is that I don't have the name of the male lead off the top of my head, but my understanding is that he's a rookie actor of sorts, and pretty young, and I think he does a great job of portraying the role that he does. Likewise, the female lead, Alana Haim, is I actually don't know what role. She's a member of the band Haim, and although I haven't really listened to their music, I've heard them on a couple of shows and things. These three sisters made this band, and they've been on a couple of shows that I listened to or watch, and they all seem like, reasonable, grounded people. And the stories about their family are interesting, and that comes directly into focus because not only did they cast Alana, they cast her three sisters and her parents as her family in world. And I didn't even realize that until after the fact. But they all do great. Very believable family. And knowing what little I know about the family background there, it's a very different family in the film than it is in real life. So it's just sort of like fascinating in its own right. I think more than anything, with this her being her first acting role, and I think all of them as first acting roles, like she's incredibly natural and a great lead character, and like does an exemplary job as an actor. So yeah, credit where it's due for both of these rookie actors and all of the other actors who may not be, trained professionals and that sort of thing. So the casting's really, really solid. And when you're dealing with a nuanced script like this, I mean, that's all the more difficult, I think. By all accounts, Paul Thomas Anderson is not a particularly difficult director to work with. So it's not like he was, I don't believe he was pulling a Kubrick or anything and making people do hundreds of takes or anything to get things right. So I think it all just kind of clicked pretty well, and everybody was natural, and it worked. So yeah, acting wise and script and writing wise, it's pretty excellent. Where it does struggle a little bit is in the narrative through line from beginning to end. And a few of the beats, and how do I explain this? The believability of certain elements, if you stop to think about them for a bare moment, it's mostly very minor. Just sort of things where you go, oh, I'm not sure that totally works if you stop to really think about it. But it's the movie moves at a pace such that it doesn't matter that much. And anyway, I'm going on a tangent. My point here is that most of the film is structured in sort of a series of vignettes, and structurally it feels like a substantial amount of time passes, but I think the intention is for it to be over a matter of months, not years or anything. It's a little bit hard to follow in that respect. And because the narrative through line is very loose, and it's I don't know. I think narratively it struggles to come to a concise conclusion, not because the story could never lead there, but because the the individual scenes and the branching elements of the narrative and the emotional development of the characters and is much more the focus. And so to I think it would be a struggle even in the best of scenarios to bring a narrative like this one into a conclusive ending. And I will say nothing to spoil how the movie concludes, other than to say I wasn't entirely happy with it. Um, and I promise you that's not a matter of like personal expectation either, just a matter of does the conclusion of the overall narrative fit the rest of the structure? And I think my vote would be sort of no. But it's interesting nonetheless. Like I said, the movie's set in the 70s. I believe the whole thing is set in 1973. And it looks like 1973. Now, I'm not old enough to have been there in 1973, but as far as my consumption of historical documentation of the era, and viewing of contemporaneous films, this looks exactly like 1973 to me. Likewise, they did some. I don't know if it was camera choice and film choice, or if it was post-processing work or some combination of both. I imagine possibly both. But visually, it looks like it was shot in that era as well. Now, obviously, the quality of some elements is better, and there's lots of work that would have been borderline impossible with the technology of the time in terms of both film quality and like camera movement and things like that without more modern technology to do steady cam and those sorts of things, not really viable. But as far as the like stylistically, it's more modern, but visually it is very couched in the 70s and very believable. And a lot of the elements of the narrative itself are straight out of the 70s, and really don't fit in any other era. But in no time do those things really feel. It doesn't feel like a nostalgia thing, and it doesn't feel like a critique either. It feels very much just like a period piece that's not trying to be a period piece. The fact that it's taken me this long in this recording to even mention it should really indicate how natural that seems to be. And because you're dealing with, you're dealing with characters, with it majorly being a character study. I think, human nature is somewhat universal through time and space, location and culture and all these things. And so I don't think any of it feels forced or awkward at all, which I think is really important whenever you're doing a period piece of any era, but especially one that's relatively recent, which is usually where they get real weird feeling when somebody's just like, hey, remember the 70s? That tends never to go well. Yeah, I won't go on that diatribe. At least not right now. So the last thing I think I kind of want to talk about is the cinematography, which does vary a bit. There are some pretty great shots. There are some long shots. There are some unusual shots. There's some really good shot composition. and use of light and darkness. There's some that, despite what I just said, is actually very reminiscent of particularly like 60s and 70s styles of cinematography with, use of dolly shots and wide lenses, or even like weird lenses that don't like weird uses of things like telephoto where it doesn't seem entirely appropriate. There's also some really extraordinary close-ups that really key in on the importance of good physical acting, good facial acting, and how much an actor can bring to the scene when their performance is not chopped up to hell, and you can see all the detail in their art. And I think there's some great moments of focus for that as well. Yeah, and overall, I think it's edited really tightly. While I mentioned some sort of questions about the narrative overall and whether it works as well as a whole as opposed to sort of a series of vignettes. I'm a little on the fence about that, but generally speaking, like, the composition and the editing is I think really solid across the board, with some particular moments of even more exemplary work, but nothing to complain about for sure. I don't have a whole lot more to say about it, I don't think, in a direct sense. This movie actually didn't perform that well, and that may or may not change. It is up for a couple of Academy Awards, I think. I don't think it's favored to win anything, and also, fuck the Academy Awards. Fuck the Academy, fuck the Oscars. If I haven't said that before, I should say it more, because the Oscars suck. But it's up for a couple of awards, and has been up for a bunch of other awards as well. And I think that's rightly so. As far as things that came out of 2021, definitely up there. Unfortunately, I think things I might favor to win even more might not. Well, it's the Academy. They don't fucking know cinema at all. Anyway, I believe the Academy Awards are on the day that this video will go up, so I'm getting right in under the wire on the release. If anybody gives a shit to listen to what I have to say about it before the Academy spits on it, probably. But the movie is a little niche, and I don't think it got a very wide release. And so, it's not like an indie art film or something like that, but it's niche enough and requires an emotional investment that is probably a little off-putting to a more general movie-going audience. There's also a few moments of like, oh, that's kind of weird, that I've seen a few people blow out of proportion, but I think make for a much more interesting narrative thing. I'm not going to say anymore just because it's I don't want to spoil anything. Yeah, it's pretty solid. I don't think it's my favorite movie of the year, but it's a very solid film. Yeah, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time.